Dakle, moje ime je Vladimir Radunović ispred Diplo fondacije. Ideja nam je da na neki način bacimo svetlo na cyber rizike, naravno, na rizike od cyber napada, odnosno cyber bezbednostne aspekte, iz jednog malo drugačijeg ugla, iz jednog iskustva zemlje koja je svakako tu vrlo napredna. Ja ću se zbog gošće prebaciti na engleski, nadam se da će to biti ok, so I'll switch to English so it's easier for our guests to also understand. And it's my pleasure to have with us today Her Excellency Alona Fisher-Kamm, Ambassador of Israel to Serbia. Thank you for the welcome. Thank you for joining us and for being willing to share the vast experience that Israel has in this field. If there is anyone that we could invite to address this topic quickly, that really is Israel. If we try to look at what the risks are when it comes to cyberspace, to all of us, and most of you are in business, we can use the typical risk management model of looking at the threats, the vulnerabilities, and the assets. The assets of today in digital society for all of us, all of you, are of course the networks and the computers and stuff, but it's also the data. And seldom we actually evaluate how much the data that we have, the intellectual property, everything we do worth, how much is worth. Then of course if we extended what the assets are to protect, it's not just our assets in the companies, it's also the critical infrastructure that we are working with, whether the electrical grid or many other financial sector and so on. It's also the democratic values, the society, the system of society and people. So the assets are quite important. Then the threats are global. We are having cyber criminals which can operate from anywhere in the world, more and more without much of knowledge because they can rent most of the capacities. But then besides criminals, we also have more and more of the terrorists and radical actors in cyberspace, which are also attacking sectors like business. And then we're having states. And the states are massively coming into building cyber weapons and exploring or exploiting the vulnerabilities in all of us in the society. And that is a game changer. And then if we look at the vulnerabilities, that's where are we the most vulnerable. And that's actually, of course, the government system, of course, the critical infrastructure which can be put down with a cyber attack, but it's also the business. And the whole supply chain of business, which is absolutely connected, where the weakest link can be any one of us. And it can be the entry point for a cyber attack on the whole country. So this is just a snapshot, but what we are going to look at, or how we are going to look at that today, is to flip that coin. Not to talk about risks, but to talk about opportunities. So cybersecurity is an opportunity, business opportunity if nothing, which also addresses the risks. And that's where Israel actually comes into place. Before I pass the first question to Ambassador, I wanted to look at a quick video which shows one of the models of a public-private cooperation of state, private sector, academia, defense forces, which is the lead model in Israel. We'll get back to details of that, as a showcase of how that can work, and then we'll get back to details. So I guess we can put on the video. details of that in a minute, but let's firstly focus on how did you come up to think about cyber risks rather as cyber opportunities, and how did it happen that you have become the first, I guess, or if not the first, then among the first two leaders of cybersecurity business and cybersecurity experts and products in the world?
Okay, so Israel has been developing its ecosystem for innovation in general from the 90s. So in the beginning, the first question is how to build the basis of ecosystem in general, or the ecosystem for innovation. But then with the year, taking into account that Israel is a small country and not very rich one, it has to think what would be the main fields and areas to focus on. And when you think about it, you have to take three things in consideration. The first one is, what is the future global trends? What would be the next demand, let's say, in 5 or 10 or 15 years? The second thing that you have to think of is what is your own need as a country, as the state of Israel in this case. And the third one you have to think is what would be your advantage? Where is the added value of Israel in relations to other countries? So when we talk about global trends, I think that from the beginning it was clear that the more we're going to use the internet, and I'm talking about the 90s, the more there would be a need to protect the data, the connection and then the data and so on. And indeed what we saw that more internet entered into the game, and later on we called it in other names, and today we are talking about artificial intelligence and digitalization. There were more and more attacks. More and more attacks mean more and more needs to find technological solutions for that. So that was the question of the global trends, and of course once Internet of Things entered into the game, the number of attacks have been growing dramatically all around the world. So this is one thing. The other thing is our need. Now one should understand that in Israel the financial cyber attacks now is relatively low. Israel is not the main target, not even the second target when it comes to cyber crimes. But, and this is what you mentioned, taking into account the very specific and unique geopolitical situation of the state of Israel, being in war for so long time, of course we were very vulnerable for political attacks, or for attacks for political and security reasons. And in this case, relative to per capita, we were the most threatened country for cyber attacks in the world. So that was, so there was a need for the country to protect its civil and its military infrastructure. When it comes to the added value, one should understand that Israel, being a very small country, could never have fight the enemies and could not have been in 70 years of permanent war if it counted only on its soldiers or tanks. The added value of Israel and the fact that Israel has become a kind of powerful regional player in the region is mostly because of the technological sophistication of the technology used in the war and in conflicts, which means that Israel, and especially the military, the intelligence services, the security forces, they all have special units dedicated to sophisticated technology in general and cyber in particular. These people, in a certain moment, they leave the army, they leave the security forces, and they have plenty of experience and know-how, and the question is how you're going to make use of them in order to develop and to promote your civil security, cyber security. So as you said, we took risks and we changed them into opportunities. And this is why we became a leading country. The question whether we are first or second or third, this is another question. It depends on the measures and how you count. But for sure we are a leading country in this. And I would like to quote for a second our Prime Minister Netanyahu saying, I set cyber as a national goal because it is a critical issue and a huge challenge for us. We are world pioneers and leaders, and we will continue to invest and lead in the cyber field. Now, what does it mean to lead in cyber field without entering into the first or second or third rank? First of all, in Israel, we have today 420 cyber security companies. The vast majority is in private hands, not in governmental hands. We have 25 multilateral, international multilateral with cyber R&D labs operating in Israel. We have more than 50 cyber startups that start to open every year, start to operate in Israel every year. In 2017, we had 70 company startups. And in 2017, we the export of Israel in cybersecurity, which the number of $6.5 billion. I would say that from all the private investments in cybersecurity, the global private investment in security, 16% goes to Israeli companies. So when it comes to technology, we are considered as second to the US and the first one in per capita.
A quick sub-question. When you said that you basically started with thinking, well, in the 80s, that your position is in innovation, or your opportunity is innovations. And when it comes to cyber, what was within the governmental structures, what was the driving force for thinking about innovation? Which innovation should there be? Was there a role of academia or private sector in helping that? I remember that at some point, I don't know, probably you still have the chief scientist, right? That's something that's amazing function for a country, which I don't think we ever thought of, having a chief scientist on a national level, probably supported by academia and the others. So who did you engage to help you set the strategy when it comes to innovation?
So again, since the resources of Israel are very limited, the idea was to try to see how you maximize the resources you have. And the first thing that comes into your mind is this idea to synchronize between all the different layers or different legs of what is called the ecosystem. So usually we talk about the government, we are talking about the academia, we are talking about the private sector, of course, and in Israel, as I mentioned, also the military is an important element in this. And of course, we have to take in mind that it's not cybersecurity readiness, it's not only technology. One part is the technology, the other one is the structure and the mechanism that you build in order to have an effective protection or effective security for attacks. So we had to develop at the same time national structures, law enforcement, laws, regulations and mechanisms. Now, in my opinion, in the case of Israel, the government played an important role. It played an important role in several things. Well, first of all, of course, anything that has to do with regulations, with law enforcement. This is, of course, an important element. The other thing is everything that has to do with human capital. It's not enough to have people who come out of the army and just throw them into the market. You need really to have a long-term strategy when it comes to training, to retraining, to university studies, and even high schools and primary schools, how to attract children from the very beginning to be interested in innovation in general and to be interested in cyber in particular. This is not an easy task. So this is also an important thing that the government has taken upon itself. The other thing is, of course, the incentives that are given for startups in general and for cybersecurity in particular. Now, one should understand that one of the main problems that any country has when it comes to build its own strategy is how to cut this, what I call a vicious circle. I mean, how to attract VC to come to the country, to invest in startups when you don't have startups, and how to make startups start working without having yet VCs. So one has in mind that once a country could overcome this question and could cut this vicious circle, and today in Israel we have more than 70 VCs, foreigners and Israelis working in Israel, the role of the government would be over. But this is not the case because most of the VCs, they prefer to invest in companies that have already have some results. It's very hard to convince them to invest in the earlier stage. So, for example, although for the last 10 years Israel has developed its cybersecurity industry, only in last August, Israel, the government, has launched a new initiative of incentives for new companies that want to concentrate, to focus on cybersecurity for the R&D level, in the earlier stage level, and it has launched an initiative of investing in incentives for 90 million shekels, which is about $25 million for 3 years. So we see that the government cannot step down. It always has to be there and to maintain and to support this ecosystem. So what we have here when it comes to the government role is, I think in the case of Israel, it's a will, it's a persistence, it's a kind of vision. I would say that the government of Israel started thinking about cybersecurity already in 1997. It was the first time that it came with an initiative, and later on this one has been developed. I believe that we will talk about it. What we have seen as a very good example of what you were talking about, of PPP initiative, what we have seen is the cyber innovation arena in the city of Beersheba, the Cyber Spark in Beersheba. Just to let you understand what it means, Beersheba is not one of the very biggest cities of Israel. Today it's the 5th city in Israel, and it is the capital of the desert of Israel. So it's the south of Israel. It's relatively far from the centers. So it's not an obvious decision to develop such a big cyber spark in a place that is relatively remote to the ecosystem. Now, this is exactly where there was a need for joint venture. Of whom? Of Prime Minister's office, of Beersheba municipality, of Ben Gurion University, this is the university in the city of Beersheba, the military, and of course the leading companies that have been given the incentives in order to relocate or to locate from the beginning in this city. The idea was to create a kind of one-stop shop for information, for networking and access to information and all relevant cyber stakeholders. And it offers different platforms and a lot of platforms to assist business in leveraging the Israeli cyber industries. Now, what does it mean in concrete steps? First of all, the military has moved all the units, the sophisticated technology units, from the center to the south. Secondly, the university has been given a very important role in the research and R&D, and it has been upgraded in order to transmit the know-how and the experience and the theoretical knowledge into the practical business world. The other thing, it has been created as a hub, R&D hub. It has been supported by the government, of course, with tax initiatives. It is providing training centers for professionals. It is an incubator, again supported by the chief scientists. So it's a whole ecosystem, and also it provides an intelligence center. So it's a kind of ecosystem that gives solutions for everything. And I think that it consists of three elements, the ecosystem of Israel. This is the prevention, the detection, and the reaction.
One clarification probably that's important is for what I understood when it comes to defense forces or military services in Israel, which takes for 2 or 3 years, right, to serve. But it's actually a lot of learning within the defense forces. So people that come out from the army actually already get a lot of expertise also in cyber, right? I think that's quite an important clarification. But this, we see the army sometimes differently. But what is important there is what you mentioned that actually it was initiative by the state. It was a lot of foreign investors, including Deutsche Telekom, Dell, and many other which are partners there. It was a strong university which has already good curriculum when it comes to IT. And I understand it's not just the technology; it's a multidisciplinary approach, right? Because there are some master programs for the CEO level executive and stuff, and then the defense forces. So basically, each one of them has to play a role in that. And then maybe a question is, what is the particular role of big and small business or possible startups in that sort of initiative?
Well, I think that startups are in the core of everything. You just need to give them incentives, but at the end, they are the one who will move the whole industry forward. Now, I think that to understand, and this is not only for the cybersecurity in Israel, but it's a question of education from very young ages. In Israel, when you would ask someone, a child, what would he like to be when he grows up, he will always say, to have my own startup. I mean, nobody would say to be diplomat or ambassador, no, or to be governmental, to work for the government. It's a kind of spirit that we have, that everyone wants to have his or her own startup. So the spirit is there. You need, of course, to channel it to the right, to the more productive things, and from very young age. But it's really there. The spirit of being an entrepreneur in Israel. I was talking about the military, and one thing that a country has a big and powerful military with men and women have to serve the army. It's a very hierarchical country, but not at all. Israel is a country that is completely not formal. And people think and work and behave in networks, not in hierarchical way. And this is something that really promotes a spirit of entrepreneurship and this idea of having my startup, work with a small group of people or friends, develop something, get incentives from the country, and be able to develop it and to commercialize it, and later maybe to make exit. And we have in Israel a lot of role models, something that is very important. I mean, those who made it, who started with startups and became then big and established companies, they are well known, their faces are well known in Israel, more than the politicians, for example. So you have role models in Israel, you have the right spirit for entrepreneurship. So it's a kind of an ecosystem that it's bottom up and top down. The government has to do a lot of things top down, but if you don't have the spirit from the people on the ground, you would never make it.
The interesting thing is that, going back now to risks, actually, through creating these opportunities, you are basically building national competencies, or people that are competent to approach cybersecurity problems or solutions. You are creating new curriculum within your university. You're creating startups, solutions as well, software, hardware, tools, and so on. So effectively, you are raising the bar of your preparedness in cybersecurity on a national level, through also supporting small and medium enterprises which are not in IT, right? Through all of that. So it is a comprehensive solution to addressing the risks as well, right?
And I would add one more thing, because as I said in the very beginning, it's not only a question of technology. When you talk about the preparedness or readiness of a country for any cyber attack, you have to think of the structure. What is the structure? Whether the government could create the right bodies and institutions and how they work together in order to prevent attacks. So in this case, I mentioned that already in 1997, we had, and this is a kind of progressive, it's very progressive process. What do I mean? In 1997, when there was the first resolution regarding cybersecurity in Israel, the idea was to protect the connecting of the government offices to the internet. So that was a kind of reactive initiative, very passive initiative in a way. In 2002, what we see already is the creation of the National Information Security Authority, which has also the mandate of regulating and advising to companies. So you see here more active. But still what lacks here at that time was the long vision. The vision came later on, and in 2010, the National Cyber Initiative has been created in Israel, and that was a kind of task force that has been established that would formulate national plans to place Israel among the 5 leading countries in the world. That was already in 2010. And one of the ideas is to put everything under the Prime Minister's office. And the idea of having it under the Prime Minister's office it was first of all because it's an interdisciplinary solution, as you said. Secondly, because the budget and the power are there. And this is most important in order to implement whatever idea you have, because these ideas, they cost a lot of money. So it was important from the beginning to put everything under the Prime Minister's office. And then from this initiative of 2010, what we could see later on 2011 and 2012, that was the creation of the Israeli National Cyber Bureau, which is the strategic layer of the Israeli preparedness, of the structure of the Israeli preparedness. And then later on in 2014 to create the executive body of it. So you have a strategic solution, then you have the executive one, and then you have, of course, the core body of it is the Israeli CERT, as every country has, the cyber event readiness team.
Thank you. Maybe at the end, just to wrap up the discussion, what would be your message, a tweet, a couple of tweets, extended tweets, to the audience here, which are mainly from the private sector, mainly small, medium enterprises, some of the big ones. What is their role? What is our role when it comes to building, utilizing the potential of cybersecurity as a lucrative business? I'm sure you motivated some of them to think about more cybersecurity solutions, and I'm sure Israel would be happy to assist these developments here. But what would be the message for people here? How can each one of us help this whole structure, maybe even nudging the state or helping the state to come up to the more, strategic approach, or doing it ourselves? What would you suggest?
Well, first of all, I think that one has to be persistent. One has to be a long vision. It's not something that occurs like that. I mean, I talk mostly on governmental level. The results are not immediate. And this is something that we have to take into account. It's a process that one has to be persistent, one has to be visionary, and one has to understand that maybe it's not this government, but the next government that will see the fruit. That has been the case of Israel, that has kept the same politics in spite of so many differences in the political level. When it comes to the entrepreneurs, I would say that I think of the main reasons for success of Israeli startups is the fact that people were ready to take risks. And the government, what has done, is to try to minimize these risks so they would be successful. But, and this is again, it has a lot to do with the spirit of Israelis to take risks and to start things. And it has to do with something that I must admit that personally, I underestimated it. Whatever I read about it, people talked about it, about the spirit of taking risks. And I said, look, maybe it is not so important, but the more I read researches about the Israeli case, the more I get into conclusion that yes, there is something in that. And this is the idea that failure is good. I mean, when you come to present your startup in Israel to any investor, the first thing that you would be asked, how many times you failed in the past? Because it seems that only from failures you learn, and what the failures that you took before, maybe with other investors, probably you would not repeat them again. So I would not say that it's global in the whole society, but when it comes to startups, failure is considered in Israel as something good, as something that one has to experience not only once and twice, and especially if you take into account that it's a very risky business. I mean, the vast majority of startups in Israel could not develop to more than the earlier stage. By the way, in cybersecurity, the risk is less. According to statistics, almost 50% of the startups in cybersecurity in Israel could survive. And this is by far more than any other sector. So maybe this is also something to think about.
Thank you. As our famous Del Boy would say, next time this year we'll be millionaires, so he who dares. Vince, thank you, Ambassador, so much for your insights into that, and I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to discuss, and you'll definitely help us in boosting this story. Thank you so much.